The Nintendo Switch is a great console. With so many games to choose from casual indie games to bigger adventures like Mario Odyssey, you'd like to think there would also be a good amount of classics on the system. Not really. There are a handful of re-releases of these classic games on the Switch, but the rest are locked behind the Switch Online subscription service. Even then, there's only a handful of NES and SNES games available to play currently, and though there might not be a lot, I think it'd be a nice challenge to try and find a good amount of games I actually enjoy in them. So here's some of my personal favorite Switch Online classics, beginning with Pilot Wings. Pilot Wings is a flight simulation game that puts you through different missions revolving around flight. Your goal is to clear these missions with enough points to in turn get certified for your next license to progress further on in the game. There are 4 different types of missions that involve different equipment, these being skydiving, light plane flying, rocket belting, and hand gliding. All of these are surprisingly easy and fun to control, and heck, if you're having trouble with perspective, then you can press L or R to change your view, and trust me, you will need this for some of the later rocket belting missions. Speaking of perspective, for the time it came out, Pilot Wings looks really good graphically, but the pseudo 3D rings aren't great. I won't give the game too much flack for this, but there have been more than a few times where I tried going through a ring and it almost looks like I'm through it, but it didn't actually count. Half of the time I end up rewinding anyway, so I don't think I have the right to complain about that. Anyway, back to the missions. Light plane flying is probably my favorite, seeing as it's the most fun to control. Typically in them you'll be flying through rings, then making a swift landing. I said swift... never mind. Skydiving is the first form of flight introduced, and it also involves falling through rings, letting your parachute out, then making a good landing on the landing platforms. Understanding the controls for falling takes some practice, but give it some time and you'll be a professional in no time. Rocket belting has you touching poles or going through arcs or something similar, then once again landing, and paragliding, you get the idea. Light plane flying and skydiving have to be the most difficult to land with, as getting a good angle on the runway or landing platforms is not very easy. I'd prefer not to rewind in games unless I have to, because I will admit it does feel like cheating, but for the sake of my own sanity, I'm just gonna use the feature because... frick you. And around the end of the game, it takes a sudden shift in tone with a mission where, using all of your knowledge from your training, you have to save your instructors by flying to the evil Syndicate's base and rescue them. You even have to avoid getting shot down by their hidden cannons. Honestly, this shouldn't have come so out of nowhere for me, considering you're literally training to get your pilot's license throughout the game, but it's a surprise to be sure. Overall, Pilot Wings is a bit difficult, but I'd recommend trying it out regardless, especially since you have access to restore points. It's not too long, and it's a pretty unique game in the library. Out of all the random and not so great NES sports games, I was surprised that I simultaneously got the most engaged and frustrated with ice hockey. Let me explain. So before starting a game, you choose a team, then arrange the order of your team, fight for the puck, and the game begins. Games consist of 4 periods, and you have to get the most points to win. To do that, you'll have to swing the puck into the opposing team's goal. While this is engaging, I will admit it can also be equally as frustrating. Now, I have a few reasons for this. 1, the CPU is at a clear advantage on both sides, because if they're closing in on your goal, then you have to control the goalie and your team to get the puck away from the goal. And it's not exactly easy to pay attention to your team when you're dealing with this constant back and forth bouncing of the puck. Whenever you can grab the puck with the goalie, it's usually easier to get yourself out of this rut, but half of the time I can't seem to get him to do so because the other team is blocking him, which not only wastes the time for that period, but also gets me more and more annoyed. On the other side, if you're at the opposing team's goal, there's a good chance you won't make the shot because the CPU goalie is really good at blocking shots. I'm honestly not certain if the power of your shot affects whether or not it'll go through the goalie, but I can barely ever get a good shot charged without being interrupted a millisecond in by the CPU. The best strategy I've found is to find a good opportunity to pass the puck between your teammates a bunch, then hopefully that'll send the goalie going in the opposite direction of wherever you are, leaving a small space open for you to make a quick shot. Honestly, I could see myself having more fun with this in multiplayer, but if you can get used to it, single player can be pretty fun. Keep in mind, I said can, because while recording I got beat so hard in this one game of ice hockey that it got 2-20. Next we have the best kart racing game on the SNES, Super Mario Kart. I mean F-Zero. Well, one of the better ones I've played at least. I'm sure most people watching this are already familiar with F-Zero, but for those who aren't, basically it's a fast-paced racing game that really focuses on the speed aspect. Getting first in any given race means keeping yourself at a high enough speed to catch up with the competition, and since there aren't any items to aid with knocking opponents out of the way, you have to go head on and push their cars with yours to slow them down. To add to this, each car has a health meter so that if they take too much damage, they'll straight up explode. So on top of managing your rank in the race, you should also keep an eye on your HP occasionally just to make sure you're not being too reckless. Apart from that, there are a good number of cars to choose from, even if I can't tell much of a difference in them aside from how hard they all turn. There's not much to say about the tracks, but they're fun enough to race on and do a good job of keeping you on your toes while fighting against the CPU. It's a good balance of difficult, yet still fun at times and really stressful. I honestly can't think of anything else to add here, but just give it a shot. It's a pretty fun little racer that's a nice distraction from Mario Kart. This part of the video is dedicated to a few honorable mentions that I don't have the time to talk about, or there's so little to say in regards to them that they don't need as much spotlight. First, River City Ransom. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you what the story was in it because it went through my head, but the game itself consists of beat-em-up style gameplay mixed in with a whole city to explore. Overall, I would say River City Ransom is one of the most fun beat-em-up games I've played in a while simply because of the unique nature of it. Honestly, that surprises me considering it's an NES game, but there's no fooling. I'd highly recommend that you also play it in multiplayer because that's about equally as fun as the game is by yourself, if not more so. Yoshi's Island is another good SNES title. At the moment I haven't gotten very far in it, but once again I highly recommend it for those who haven't gotten the chance to try it out already. It's a very fun platformer that manages to not only make you grow to have a strong distaste for crying babies, but also delivers in great level design and just as great music. And it's also better than Super Mario World. Lastly for today, may I introduce you to Yoshi for the NES. You might think I'm joking, but I was genuinely addicted to this game, enough so that I kinda, sorta played it for 7.5 hours. You know, that's nothing. Yoshi NES is a puzzle game like no other where you stack classic Mario enemies on top of each other. The catch is that eggshell halves will occasionally be thrown into the mix, giving you plenty of opportunities to get even more points by putting down a bottom half eggshell below a stack of enemies with a top half eggshell on top, which will cause all of the enemies between the eggshells to be cleared out. Hopefully that didn't sound too confusing because trust me, one day I will make this game into a competitive esport. It honestly doesn't get much more simple than that, so if you have any personal favorite NES or SNES games, then feel free to share them with me. I wanted to talk about more games, but honestly it was hard enough to find a good amount of games that I'd actually be willing to play, so for now I'm just gonna get back to practicing my Yoshi tech. So you better get practicing yourself or I'll eat your sandwich.